Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Andre Tonelli, and today's chord is one that you've heard a million times and you probably used it yourself. And it has a bit more depth to it than it's usually given credit for. So we're gonna get into all the details and hopefully you learn something new about it. So let's begin. The SUS4 chord, or suspended 4 chord, or sometimes simply called the suspended chord, is a very common and useful chord. It comes from the classical tradition where its theory was a bit more involved than it is today, because today it's used very freely, but we will have a look at that theory in the sound section. You'll find it in all kinds of music, from classical music, of course, to soundtrack and rock music, pop. You'll find it pretty much everywhere. It's really a simple and useful chord to have. So before we get into all that, let's see how we build it with the formula, and then we'll take it from there. Very similar to the SUS2 chord that we looked at not too long ago. Here's a link in case you missed that video. The SUS4 chord, again, is a chord that's neither major nor minor. That's, of course, when taken by itself. If it is preceded or followed by other chords, it's very likely that those chords will kind of complete the sound of the SUS4 chord and let you know if it's major or minor. But if you look at simply one SUS chord, you don't know if it's major or minor because it's missing the information that tells you if a chord is major or minor, which is the third. So a major chord has the major third, a minor chord has the minor third, but the SUS4 chord doesn't have any thirds. All right, so the sound is in function very similar to the SUS2 chord, but in sound it's quite different because the second and the fourth are really different intervals and they have different effects on your ear. And so here's how we build the SUS4 chord. We have a root, which is always in these videos is C. And then we have, let's skip the fourth for a second, we have the G, which is the fifth. Okay, so this is the same as for pretty much every other chord. But the big thing here, as I said, is that there's no third, so we replace the E of C major or the E flat of C minor for the fourth. And the fourth is, in the case of C, F. How do you find the fourth? You can look at it two ways. You can count 5 half steps from the root, or you can simply count 2 half steps down from the fifth. In this case, we can maybe look at the fifth, which is G, and work our way down 2 half steps or 1 whole step, and we find an F. So the end result of this is we have a C as the root, we have the F as the perfect fourth, and we have the G as the fifth. And you get this sound, which is very airy, very ambiguous, and it's the sound of the SUS4 chord. And there it is, the sound of the SUS4 chord. As I said before for the SUS2 chord, suspended doesn't mean that it's suspended because it's neither major nor minor. Suspension is actually a device that's used in composition, and it comes from the classical tradition. And in the SUS2 chord we didn't talk about it, but I will get a little bit more into depth with this today. So the idea with suspended chords or suspension as a device is that you have a note that fits over a chord, and then the chord changes, but you hold that note. So that note will now be not part of the chord, and then resolve it. All right? That's what suspension does. And I'm going to give you a little example here. Let's say you're playing a G chord. Let's just play. Okay, this is a G chord, G, B, and D. And then I go to D. All right? So I could go simply to D, from G to D. Now, this is a regular chord change. If I want to use suspension in the theoretical sense, then I could do this. I could play the G, and when I move to D, I will hold on to this G here. Okay, so now this G is not part of the D chord. It was part of G, is not part of D, because D is D, F sharp, A, and then I remove the G to reveal the note of the chord underneath, which is the F sharp. Okay, so we have G, a D with a G over it, and then finally I remove the G to resolve down to C, to F sharp. So this is the idea behind suspension in the traditional sense. Nowadays, we use suspended chords freely, so we don't have to worry where they come from or worry about where they go. Okay, we can just use freely a sus4 chord, but it's where it comes from. So the names come from the fact that it's associated with a compositional device, which is suspension. All right, it's not that it's floating because it's not major nor minor. Another thing that's interesting about suspended chords, which we talked about in the sus2 video, so I'll go over it very quickly. It's how a sus4 chord is an inversion of a sus2 chord and vice versa. So if I have a C sus4, I have C, F, and G. Okay, so root, fourth, and fifth. But if I start from the next note up, so from the F, I have F, G, and C. And this is a sus2 chord. Okay, so they're the same chord in inversion. And that's why you don't have to worry so much about the theory behind the sus2 and the sus4. You can kind of pretty much use them freely. All right, so that's another thing. Another thing you'll find is the sus4 chord is sometimes or often used in conjunction with the dominant function. We did look at the 7 sus4 chord or dominant sus4 chord. Here's a link. You should check that out if you haven't watched it, because it really will shed some light onto the sus4 idea. But again, you can have a sus4 triad with a seventh, and you get this dominant sound, but that's a lot softer. There's no tritone, you know, so go check out that video. There's all the details there. But it's another very common use of sus4 chords. Use it with a seventh. In jazz, it's very often used with a ninth, so it's a dominant ninth sus4. And it's something you should explore. And of course, besides the 7 sus4, which we already did, I will go into all the other chords basically, because this series will be pretty much covering all possible chords. And another thing I like to mention is the most common use of the sus4 chord, which to me sounds pretty cheap, and I try to avoid it, even though Queen used it. And if Queen used it, then it's fine, because Queen can do no wrong. You probably heard this song, right? It's a sus4 chord back to its regular major, but it is a common use. So you have the sus4 resolving onto its own major version. So C sus4 down to C. And you find this in all kinds of music, in classical too, and soundtrack. But to me, it sounds a bit cheap sometimes because it's so predictable. So there's ways around it, you know, beyond the scope of this video, but you should check it out, how to resolve a sus4 chord onto its own root, okay, down to major. And what else? That's pretty much it for the sound of sus4 chord. Again, it's a very free to use chord. You can pretty much use it anywhere. Just make sure, if you're in a major scale, for example, to only use it on the degrees of the scale that allow it. Okay, some degrees of the scale, in major, one of them does not allow you to use a sus4 chord, and another degree, which is the 7th degree, doesn't even have a 5th. Okay, so every time you learn a chord, especially the easy ones like this, always keep in mind that, okay, I can't just pop it in anywhere, right? Even just the power chord, you can't pop it in anywhere, because on the 7th degree, it's a diminished 5th. Okay, so always keep that in mind. When you use these chords, kind of be mindful of the harmonic context in which you're using them. So now, as always, let's move on to 3 fingerings for this chord, and let me again suggest that you study way more than 3, but these will get you started. So the first one, we stay in this area here of the 3rd fret of the 5th string. It's a very common place to begin, and we'll do this. We have C on the 5th string on the 3rd fret, and then we have the 5th on the 5th fret of the 4th string, that's a G. Then a C again, right underneath it, 5th fret of the 3rd, and then we play the 4th on the 6th fret of the 2nd string. That's the F. Okay, very useful chord because it's so close to its parent chord, major and minor. Also keep in mind that you could double the G up here to get this sound, which is kind of pleasant as well. It's a bit deeper, right? Because you have the bass in the 6th string. You can choose either this position or this. Doesn't make any difference, it's just a sound difference. All right, so that's the first one. From here, we move up to the 8th fret again. I always try to give you 2 options here. And here's the position. we play a big bar with the first finger, so it could be a bit hard if you're a beginner, but keep working on it. And so you play the 6th, 5th, 2nd, and 1st string. You play the 8th fret with this finger, okay? And then in the 2 middle strings, the 4th and 3rd, we play the 10th fret like this. So we have 8, 8, 10, 10, 8, 8. Very useful because you can use it for strumming and to make it sound really big. And then we move up to the 10th fret of the 4th string. We have C, then we have a G on the 12th fret of the 3rd, and then 13, 13, we play C and F. Okay, so this is a very common position, and you've probably seen it down here with a wiggly little finger. Right? We all do that sometimes, and it's the same thing. But now it's movable, so it's a bit more useful because you can move it anywhere you want. All right, so 10, 12, 13, 13. And these are the 3 positions of the SUS4 chord. When it comes to scales, we're kind of spoiled for choice here because this chord only has 3 notes, root, 4th, and 5th. And as long as your scale has a root, a perfect 4th, and a perfect 5th, then you can pretty much use anything. I will just keep it simple and useful in today's video, and maybe the scales that you use most with this chord are major, which of course you could do minor, right? Because this chord is an either or. And then the mixolydian, because it really exemplifies the dominant sus4 sound. It's a dominant scale with a perfect 4th. All right, so the first one is major. So over this chord, you have the sound of the regular major scale. Right? Something like that, so certainly a major sound. And the second option, as I said, is mixolydian, which gives you the sound of more of a dominant version of this. Okay, but you can of course impose that over a regular sus4 chord. So same chord, but the scale now is like this. Okay, so a bit more edgy and a bit more unstable, which is kind of the point when it comes to dominant chords. So I would probably use, to begin with, major or minor, you can switch them, and then mixolydian. And then after that, I will explore any scale that has a root, a perfect 4th, and a perfect 5th. And on that note, no pun intended, we'll wrap up this video on the sus4 chord. I hope that you found it useful and interesting, and if you did, please consider maybe subscribing to the channel, liking, commenting, maybe share it with your friends, because it will really help me out as a channel, but also it could probably help out people who find this information, who are trying to learn about chords. And on a final note, as I often say, if any of these videos sound confusing to you, or too difficult, or too out there, because this chord, how am I going to use that? Don't worry about it, because you'll be able to, as you watch all the videos, you know, all the information throughout the videos will come together for you. So I can't go into 100% detail about every chord, but if you watch a bunch of these videos, the information that you find in all of them will eventually come together and make a lot of sense. All right, so don't sweat the details, just get a feel for the chord, use it in your own music, forget about the theory, forget about the rules, just if you find a sound that you like, go for it and use it. And then of course you can seek out more information on each of these chords, especially the ones that are really resonating with you. All right, so that's my advice, and I hope you have a great week, and I will see you next Tuesday for a new chord. Bye-bye.